She Quest Podcast is the home of heart-opening dialogues, stories, and experiences for self-identified women on a She Quest. Season 5 is now bilingual as I welcome co-host Nadia Bonenfant. Hey, Nadia!
Hey, Estelle. Delighted to be part of She Quest Podcast. Forward movement to live aware, bold, and whole. Let's do this.
Woohoo! Hi, everyone. This is She Quest Podcast, and Kate Inglis is gracing us for a third time because she's so epic. But this is part 3 of conversations on grief, really, sprinkle with our experiences and reflections of, what it's like to live with grief warm, to keep grief, warm. If you didn't know already, because I just keep plugging your book, but I really want everyone to go get A Field Guide to Grief Notes for the Everlost by Kate Inglis, which in part 1 and part 2, I refer to it a lot. Your book has been such a game changer for me, and I really, really value your time here with us. Thanks, Kate, for being here again.
It's such a delight. It's lovely talking to you.
Oh, well, it's reciprocated. So let's just recap. I guess, part 1 really was, I felt like the onset. We talk about trauma and shock. I love that conversation, the part 1, really on shock and what it does to our bodies, a lot. And then our part 2 was about triggers, which just such a rich and we've been using that word nuance, but such a beautiful, rich and nuanced conversation that I love the places it went with kind of sharing our work and words online. And today it's kind of going this way where I think I want, this is why this podcast is why I wanted you here. A big part of my mission really has been educating. All this to say, I wanted you here. I want to talk about grief and creativity and just I think for us, and don't put words in my mouth, Kate, but I think it's really been a necessity, not only because we're both inclined, and I think that's a bit of for me anyways, the misunderstanding. I just cringe so much when people come to me and they're like, I don't have a creative bone in me, or I don't have, and I just feel so sad, by that. I mean, it did take me kind of years to kind of get where I am. And I think it can also, you're an author, and I'm a painter, and we're both established in our careers. We're doing this professionally. And I think the line can be blurred between, nurturing your creativity in solitude. And do you know what I mean? That line where it's people get confused, oh, well, she sells her art and then creativity helps. What?
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm taking on a lot of tangent, but I want to talk, in relation to grief. And on that note, you know what I'm going to ask you. What makes you feel alive today?
I always give some cantankerous answer to that. I think what makes me feel alive today is physical pleasure, because yesterday we escaped the stress of this lockdown in the woods. We went to sort of an outdoor bike park with the kids, and we went to a waterfall, got my feet in the water, and just went for a really lovely brisk walk with the birds and the sunshine. And when you're in lockdown, but you can at least still do that, a retreat to the wilderness, you can pretend out there that that nothing is amiss, because nature never changes in that way. It will always feed you beauty, and it will always feed you a fresh set of air in your lungs. And that is never, ever a bad thing, or never not a good thing. It will always replenish you somehow, even if you feel like you're beyond replenishment. And so I'm really kind of just happy about that, and really determined to kind of get outside of, I have very, very sloth-like instincts. which doesn't help that I do tend to get kind of lethargic. I live on my computer because I'm writing all the time. And I'm not naturally athletic at all. I can go like months without moving. And so it's not like it comes naturally to me to be like, all right, let's pack up the family and get outside and go and have a little, get my heart rate up. But I'm always so glad when I do. And that I've found a few things that do kind of feel like my things, like having bought a road bike and cycling, or going for a hike with the boys. And that's what makes me feel alive today, is just connecting with your physical body. And I know that you are the reigning queen of this gospel for sure.
But I love that you say that it doesn't come naturally, because I don't think like it comes naturally to a lot of people. And
Yeah.
like I feel like I grew up with a dad that was always like taking me everywhere and just this and that. And I do feel like it's almost an instinct for me to like exercise and
Mm,
like move my body, and in that way, yeah, it's never like a choice almost for me. More.
sure.
Yeah, but I don't think it's like everyone's cup of tea. I love talking about these extremes where like, sometimes you won't move your body for like months. And I
Hmm.
think that's like really natural.
Yeah, I know, especially for some of us, but I do feel like, as someone who's very sort of non-athletic, I mean, I say that, but then I do lots of things. I ski in the winter, and I ride in the off season. But I think my mom used to work at Woozles. She worked at, which is Canada's oldest children's bookstore. And she worked there for, I think, 15 years or so. And she always used to say there's no such thing as a kid who isn't into reading.
Mm,
It's just that that kid hasn't found their books yet.
mm,
And that's true for adults as well. And I think that's also a good metaphor for, you know, straining your lungs a little, like getting to the point where you're like you're actually kind of starting to get your heart rate up and break into a bit of a sweat. It's like, no, very few of us want to like throw a medicine ball back and forth. Very few of us are CrossFit maniacs. But it could be that you just haven't found your physical channel yet. You haven't figured out that actually you are a swimmer. You just don't know it yet. So I think we all have to just keep trying to find our physical song. And some of us, I think, just haven't found it yet, and we have to find that groove and that flow and that rhythm, even if it's just walking in the woods. There are some people that just really never think of going into the woods. And even that, I mean, almost anyone can do that, as long as you've got two functioning legs. And yeah, but it does take, there's sort of a practice that for some of us, it's not as close to the surface to find that thing that changes the air in your lungs. And I think it is a practice to keep some degree of optimism, to not get down on yourself, but to say, I just haven't found my channel yet physically.
mm. And to stay kind of curious too, like I try to change it up a lot. Sometimes I feel I'm like someone came on the show once, and she said, I loved it so much. She said she was a creative ritualist.
Oh,
And
that's a neat word.
yeah, and I love that because like I really feel like every day I kind of ask my body what it needs. Like I used to have like a schedule, and really since my son passed away, it's so much more fluid than that. And we've used that word, I think, primal too. Like, no, but what does my body need like today? And so the rituals that you do become so much more creative, like not because you've been running for the past 20 days, like, oh, like today I need to go running, like instead it's like, oh, like maybe I need to plunge myself in cold water today, or like, I don't know. And like, so I love that idea of like like seasons and cycles with what you need, like physically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, lately, like nature, and I think that's one of the things that, like, lockdown or not, like, yesterday my son and I, we just walked down our street and there's the freaking Atlantic Ocean, like
Mm-hmm.
right at our feet. And oh, they said government say to stay in your community. Like, oh my God, like this is my community. Like, it's like
Yeah.
a freaking ocean.
Yeah.
So tell us about, I'm going to pull like I usually do. There's a line in your book because I want to revert back to kind of creativity, but
Right. Right.
right.
But I do think there's actually really strong links between
Oh, yeah.
sort of a yin and yang of being in your body, figuring out how to be in your body, giving your body a channel, giving your body some time and attention, and then being internal. So then being in your heart and in your mind and finding the right channel in that way. And I think if you are letting one side fall down, and if you're no longer searching for the yin, to find your right yin in terms of your body, then your yang isn't going to be balanced and functioning very well either. So there's the transition. there's the segue.
Yeah, 100%. And like, I feel now every time I'm about to do something creative, like I need to take it like a breath, like I need to pause before I do anything. Like I can't do it scattered. Like I've tried, but like usually I see that link between like being in your body and like tapping into that source, like when you're fully present, like that dialogue with the muse or whatever you call her, you call it, or
Yeah.
even if you have one, I'm not sure, but like, that dialogue back and forth to be as clear, like the conduit. I don't know if you think I'm talking woo-woo here, but like, but like the clearer conduit, like I feel I'm so in tune with that. Like whenever I feel funky, like I'll just, I'll do my yoga practice, I'll do my rituals, and then, I sit down and do, the work. One of the first workshops I led actually was like the relationship between yoga and creativity.
Hmm.
And that was like, oh my God, that was like a decade ago. And like to realize that really like your breath, like breathing is a creative act. Like the
Yeah.
inhale and the exhale like is a creative act. And
Yeah.
I remember being like, oh my God, if you study breath for like a second, you would like know you're a creative person, like you're a
Yes.
living, breathing, like inspiration, like you're literally like inspire, like inhaling and exhaling your life. Like I just love to see it like that.
Yeah. Well, we give so much attention to our heart and our brain. We never really think about our lungs. And I think it's through the lungs that we connect with all the sort of all the meat suit parts of our body, all of the other sort of what we think of inanimate or machine-like parts of our body that we don't really speak to, quote unquote. We don't really sort of I'm not going to get that word right. I never can. We're not going to sort of assign personality to anything or a sense of conversation and dialogue with anything other than the heart and the mind. But we don't think about, I think it's the lungs is kind of the third leg of that stool in terms of connecting us to all the quiet sort of silent players within our body that need care too. Anyway, I keep getting you off track. You were looking in the book, I think.
No, I love this lung thing because I had a
Yeah.
teacher, she would say, your lungs are the wings of your heart.
Hmm.
So I do want to, I'm going to read a line of your book that I always say there's like, that was my favorite passage, but they're pretty much our favorite. And it says, when you said, I appreciate how art rearranges the impossible into a shape we can absorb.
Yeah. Well, early on, you in our chat today, you were talking about the sort of tragedy of people who would say, "I don't have a creative bone in my body," and I was sort of thinking about that because I know people who would say the same thing. But I think the problem is that we need to first define our terms. So when we say creative, what do we mean by that? Because I think everyone has creativity. That's a fundamental sort of spectrum of human expression, and how we build our expression. But it doesn't necessarily mean, painter, writer, singer, uh, you know, sketch artist, it quilter. It can be, creativity can manifest in so many different ways. And I think some people do have brains that are just not, that just don't lean to creative expression as the place that helps them to sort through what they need to sort through. So I know people that are creative with chainsaws. I know people who are creative in terms of how they move their body, or in terms of how they approach challenges in their life. That they wouldn't describe themselves as creative. I think so. When we say that creativity can give us sort of a path through trauma, that doesn't necessarily mean painting, drawing, singing, writing. It can mean any number of things. And, we just have to sort of, I think it's all about searching. We have to just keep searching for the ritual, the routine, the practice that taps into our innate creativity. And you might not be able to draw anything more than a stick figure like me, but you may be a creative gardener. You may be a creative surfer. You may be creative in terms of how you jump into action and help other people, So I think when we find that creativity to tap into, whatever that looks like for us, without shaming ourselves for, I would say that I don't have a creative bone in my body when I define creativity in terms of pencil and paint. I really have no sort of hand-eye coordination in terms of expressing myself. I can type on a computer, and I know how to translate creativity through f-stop and aperture by using a camera. So I'm extremely creative in some ways, and in other ways, I'm absolutely hopeless. So I feel like one of the most important things we can do is, so what if you're not patchwork quilting or scrapbooking, or really particularly into drawing or felting or knitting or anything else? In the same way that we need to keep searching for our body's outlet, and you may have just not found it yet, we also need to keep searching for our creative outlet, and you may have not found it yet. For you, that might be restoring an old car. You may discover late in your life that you have mechanical creativity. The most important thing we do is we keep searching, and that gives us an escape, a channel, a pathway, so that when we're feeling overwhelmed by difficulty, by trauma or grief, we know that if we go out and dig in the dirt and even just weed and tend to our creativity, that's what it looks like for us. And that's a positive thing. That's going to help us cope when we're feeling dark and overwhelmed.
And you said, if I recall, you started blogging in NICU, or before that. You were blogging before that.
I was, yeah. I mean, it's funny. There's a lot associated with the word blog that I don't like, that it kind of turned into. It became a lot about sort of keywords to sell Swiffer wet jets.
Yeah.
And I just, so when I hear the word blogging, I sort of cringe a little bit. And I maybe a part of it is snobbery, which isn't, doesn't really befit any of us. But I guess it always felt like a letter to my family so that they would not call. Do you know what I mean? It's weird. It was a way, when I had my first son, it was like having an open online journal so that people wouldn't just stop by, because I really didn't want that. I wanted to be able to be walking around the house with my top down and covered in mustard poop and being kind of a mess with piles of spitty laundry everywhere and this newborn baby. And I just did not want to be bothered. I wanted to know that I didn't have to be self-conscious. That's just me. I mean, other people would want nothing more than lots of company and a busy house when they have a new baby to kind of pass around. But I have a very introverted side to me. And so I thought, you know what, rather than having to repeat the latest news and pictures, I'll just put it online and I can share with my aunts and my uncles and my cousins and my friends so that they can kind of, if they're interested, they can sort of follow along and see how Evan's growing. And so it was never done as a way of having a public audience. I didn't even know that blogging, for lack of a better word, was what it was. I didn't know that it had become, and that it would very soon become, sort of a public storytelling venue, which eventually it did become that for me, in a small way. And then obviously I already had this online journal, as I thought of it, when the twins were born. And so that was one of my channels, it was a place to just put writing. And for me, writing was already deeply embedded in as a ritual for me, in terms of helping me to feel a sense of control when I had none. And that goes way back even to when Evan was born and when Evan was a baby, because even if everything goes perfectly ordinarily, if you're blessed with an uneventful birth and an ordinary baby, which is like the greatest thing, that's all you can hope for, it's still a profoundly humbling endeavor to be a mother for the first time, because you really don't know what you're doing, and that's okay. You're really a mess, and that's okay. And you really have very, very little control. All of a sudden, your heart exists in this other tiny, highly vulnerable being. And you know that when they are 14, 15 years old, they might trip and fall. They might hurt themselves. They might break a bone. They might, who knows? I mean, my goodness, our mind just starts churning in a way it never has before. And it's all about the love you feel and the lack of control that you have around that love. Mm. And so creativity helps us to have some little corner of our existence where we do have control. It's all about our skill and our effort. You know, you can sort of control a garden. You can be creative in the kitchen. And, you know, if you add yeast to flour and water, it will rise if you put it in a warm place. So I think a lot about what sort of fuels us and calms us when we're doing our creative practice. Again, no matter how that manifests, whether it's in a garage with a wrench in our hands or in the kitchen stirring something or actually creating some form of art, it calms us because we are now in a place where we have some degree of proficiency that we can practice in order to exert control over a simmering pot, control over a canvas, control over a story or an image, a song, whatever those things are. And that's why it helps us, is because it sort of calms us. And so that's what writing was for me, because I thought I need to try to process all the thoughts in my head. And the way that I do that is by choosing my mindset and choosing the way that I'm going to tell and internalize that story of what's happening. Because writing for me is very much the act of creating the story as you go. When you are writing about yourself and your life as you're living it, which is what journaling is, we are literally framing and reframing our lives as they are unfolding. it's a very, very powerful thing to be doing, because when we step outside ourselves, our own sort of very self-absorbed sort of take on what's happening to us, when we set that to the side in order to put on the role of being an author for ourselves, that really changes and has the power to shift our read on things. And I think that's why it was such a powerful thing, that was such an instinct at 3 o'clock in the morning in the hospital after I woke up from the C-section, was if I don't start telling this story and owning this story and reframing it, this disaster, this absolute terror of a catastrophe, then it is going to bury me alive. It is going to choose its own shape, and it is going to exert that shape onto me. And I won't have any control over the tenor of that story. And it's going to change the tenor of me. And that scares me. So I'm going to take these reins right away. Even if I'm bumbling my way through, I'm going to show this story. No, this is mine. You're not going to just run rampant yourself like a bull in a china shop, like a horse, like an upset horse, imagining, just a horse that is terrified running rampant and the damage it can cause. That is the catastrophe. I am going to break that horse with love and gently. I am going to teach that horse how to calm itself so that I can stay calm, so that I can stay focused on the love, even when I'm at my angriest, even when I'm at my most raw. And writing happened to be that thing for me.
And you mentioned something about like it was already ingrained in you, and you mentioned your mom too, like working at the bookstore. I'm curious to know when it became such a natural instinct for you to like journal and write, and like is it something basically when you were very young? Or
when I was 6 years old, I drew a picture that my mother saved, and that picture is now on my bulletin board in my studio. And it says, "Things I will be when I grow up." And I remember drawing it. I divided the page into I was going to say 6 quadrants, 6 parts, whatever that would be, not 4, 6. And I said, I'm going to be a teenage girl. I was so enraptured by teenage girls. And this teenage girl was very cool, and she had curly hair because that's all I wanted in the world, and something I never was able to have. And so I wanted to be a teenage girl, and I also wanted to be a beach girl. This is a 6-year-old's fantasy, right? I wanted to have a tan and a bikini and to flop around enjoying the ocean with curly hair. That was number 2. Number 3 was to be a professional roller skater.
Nice.
Yeah. I'm still holding out for that. And number 4 was, and this is so interesting to me, the teenage girl, the beach girl, and the roller skater all had curly, fabulous hair. But number 4 was to be an author. And the author had straight hair, which is what I have. So it's almost like all the other things were just sort of silly fantasies. But I was 6 years old, and I thought, my thing is going to be writing. Now, the other 2 squares are left blank, which I also kind of love. I love sort of wondering what else I might be. I turned 48 in July, and I love feeling like maybe there's also 1 or 2 other things that I am that I haven't discovered yet. I didn't know when I was 6 years old that I would be a photographer as well. And I think that's probably number 5. And number 6, I don't know. I think it's pretty interesting to think about. But so when I drew that, and my parents would sort of look at that, and I would sort of say after that, I think that I was going to be an author. And my mom and dad's reaction was always, all right, then you better get started, get to work. And they would give me paper and a pencil and crayons and a stapler. And I remember just constantly bringing stories to my mom that she would have to staple together. And you know, yeah, we went through a lot of staples. That was almost the funnest part. But yeah, so I always knew that I wanted to be an author, but I didn't know where the stories were going to come from. I thought, I know I want to write, but I don't know. I don't have any stories in me. Like, I wouldn't even begin to know what to write. And I felt that way for a really long time, um, with the exception of being a voracious journaler. So I did always keep a journal that was um, prolific. And especially when I was pissed off. Ooh. Like, writing was the vent. Writing was always the dialogue with myself that nobody ever saw, but that was sort of, I think we all have a best friend or a sister inside of us that is something we create ourselves. That's the person we're talking to when we're shouting by ourselves in the car, when we're driving, when we just need to talk to ourselves. That's the person we're talking to. And that's the person that I was writing to for a really long time. And so I was sort of practicing holding my own story and sort of actively processing for a really, really long time. But then, you have enough life experience, you do enough observation, which I think is very much uh, something that writers in particularly, or people who end up being writers, it's something that they do innately, is to be very observant and to be a bit of a sponge in terms of soaking up places and characters, people. So I was kind of filling my bank up. That's the way I think of it, honestly, for decades, with places, experiences, moments that I would sort of file away until finally a story that wasn't my own story, a story that wasn't just the equivalent of ranting by myself in the car, came to me one day when I was walking in the woods with a 6-year-old. And he was, he had wet mittens and wet feet, and he was hungry and he was frustrated. And we were hiking through the woods with his family. And I was kind of on my own with him. And this is when Evan was, I think, 8 or 9 months old, and he was in a backpack with his dad. And I was with this kid, Eric. And he was yanging on in the woods. He was being pretty annoying. I mean, he's 6 years old. That's what they can do sometimes. And he was just belly aching. And I just started making up this story. I said, "Shh, Eric, be quiet or they'll hear you." And he just stopped and he said, "Who will hear me?" And so I started telling him the story of pirates in the woods and this ship that rumbles through the woods. And that eventually became my first novel. And so that's how I realized that stories really can be like mushrooms sometimes. They really sort of pop up organically on their own with no pattern at all. But once you train yourself to recognize those sparky moments for what they are, then you start learning to chase them. You start learning to let them bloom and grow. And yeah, so that's how I became a writer of more than just myself.
I'm so excited to introduce Estelle Thomson. Yes, that's me. Online art and yoga studio, a place to engage, explore, transform, and most importantly, play to free your unique expression of soul. With the coupon Studio 20, try 1 month of studio features with 20% off. Again, that's Studio 20, STUDIO20. You're welcome. Now back to our electrifying guests and conversation. I love the chase because I think once you've gotten a taste of it and how quick it comes too, like it's like a flash, and like you've been waiting like all your life for it. And it's like, no, like it's like,
Yeah.
this is it. Like you mentioned the chase. And I love your list and your parents.
Mhm.
Like, do you have it?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'll send it to you.
Oh
We
my
have we
goodness.
have a scan of it. Yeah.
And did you frame it?
Yeah, well, yeah, my dad, unfortunately, I forget the word for the what this is, like, he had it sort of not laminated, but pressed to a wooden board. So I would rather have it in a frame, but we also have some really high quality scans of it, um, to kind of preserve it. Because of course, it looks like an antique. It's all yellowed and ripped around the edges and torn, and yeah, but we still have it.
Oh, I love it so much because that's well, it made me think of two things. First, I kind of have a like similar story where I might have been a bit older than you, though. I was like 13 or 14, and I was talking to a girlfriend on the phone, and I was just doodling. Like I was just talking to her, and I was
Yeah.
doodling on the like corner of the phone, and like a few years later, maybe even my early 20s, anyway, for Christmas, my mom she had kept the corner of this like dirty like little paper I had doodled on it, and it was an E which and a star, which is how I sign my paintings today.
Oh,
And
yeah.
but below below it said to be continued.
Oh, nice.
Incredible.
That
And
is fantastic.
yeah, we had the scan too, but she had it the same. Like she had it put on like a wooden board when
Wow.
I know. And it's like, it's as if you're young. It's like, or something.
Yeah, well, we were who we are, and that's
Mm.
why it's so interesting to watch a child grow, whether they're a nephew or a niece, or a son or a daughter, or a grandson or a granddaughter. When you watch them grow, and like now when I look back at Ben when he was 2 years old, I think, "Yeah, that was Ben. That is who he is." And Evan, the same thing. When he was 4 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, he was certainly another version, but I can absolutely see that is exactly who he has grown into as a young man. And it's very cool when you think about it.
It's so cool. And it's so simple. Like we make things so it's just so complicated when we get older. I don't know. Maybe we have more responsibilities or this and that, but it's so simple. Like one thing that I haven't done in a while, but in some of my women's circles that I've run, like one of the first question I'll ask is like, what did you used to like playing at when you were like 8 years old or and oh my God, it just gets so moving. Like what the women say, they're like, I used to ride my bike. Like
Yeah. So, why aren't you riding your bike now? Like,
yeah.
you need to go and get some padded shorts and a good bike that isn't a yard sale throwaway, and you need to get back on that bike because you are a cyclist. You just forgot.
You just forgot. And
Yeah.
the answers, some of the answers are the best. Like there's a few I'll always remember. One was like, I used to call my friend and I would say, wanna go play?
Mhm.
Or
Yeah.
like, do you remember lip syncing, Kate? Do you
Mhm.
remember?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, the funny thing, this is actually, I think you'll like this, is when I was 8 years old, we had a very old house in Halifax, not far from Point Pleasant Park, and it had sort of Victorian closets that were tiny. But what I used to do is I used to go into the closet with my pencils and my paper, and probably at that point, a 70 or 80-year-old silk duvet that was paisley, it was an antique, and it used to belong to, I think, my great grandparents or something, and it had been sort of passed down, and it was this beautiful, soft, silky, beautiful thing, and I used to make a nest in this closet, which was just broad enough for my shoulders, pretty much. And I used to bring in a little clip-on IKEA lamp, and I would clip the lamp to a shelf. and I would make this tiny little cave for myself with the duvet and the clip-on lamp and the paper and pens. And that was what I liked doing. I would go in there for hours and I would write. And that was just, and so really, that's the best part of me now. And that's also kind of my undoing, because I'm such a sloth in that way. I really have to say, okay, Kate, get out of the closet, get away from the story for a little bit so that you can fill those lungs. But yeah, that's what I was doing when I was 8.
And you're still there. You're still in that closet.
I know. That's the funny thing. I'm actually telling that story from a closet.
Having done these interviews for a while with so many women, like that's a subject that I must say, like, comes back over and over again. Like women that are really, like, they're in line with their calling and their dharma, whether it be like artistic, ventures or not. Like they can always recall they were doing the same as kids, that's what I was doing when I was like a kid. I just like I would love one thing. It was like my favorite thing. I would put on shows for my parents, and like it was the best when we had guests over, obviously, because my parents, they were kind of they were kind of tired, but. And I would do dance shows, and I would recruit my friends, and we would like have a whole dance thing, and I would, and like, seriously, if I look at my Instagram account now, it's not much different.
Yeah, you were who you are.
Yes, I love this.
Yeah.
That saying, because it's really. And sometimes, like, I catch myself, like, I'm like, oh, why am I posting that? Like, is it like I want to show off, or like, is it? And I think about that a lot with like yoga pictures, with like, like this whole like glamorized, and then I snap out of it, and I'm like, I love this. Like, I used to do this. Like, this is me, like 110% me. Like, I don't know why I don't want to hide that. Like, I don't want to have, like, I am 39 and I still feel like I'm like, 8 or 9 years old. Like, I don't, like, I think if anything, like that's a gift that I still permit myself to do these things, like twirl around on a beach, and, and for you, like, you're still in that closet. Like,
I am.
That's incredible. Like, I knew other women, like they were fixing their dolls, and they were putting Band-Aids on their teddy bears, and they're nurses, like,
Yeah,
like,
that's right. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
I just want to, for whoever's listening, like, we're not just talking about like artistic, like, ventures.
No. Yeah.
No.
If there's anyone out there listening to this who just feels like they've lost their light, who feels just lost in general, who feels tired or heavy, I would say that would be a really beautiful thing to sit and reflect on, and like make a list. Like, get a beautiful new journal and a beautiful pen and open it up to the first page and make a list of all the stuff that you used to adore, that you used to just love doing more than anything else, and use that as your North Star to start feeding yourself again, to start throwing open all the windows of the house that is you. Like is it the Swiss or the Swedes who do that? I think it's the Swiss. There's a beautiful word for it, that even through the winter, all year long, there's a part of the day where they open all the windows of a house. Doesn't matter how cold it is. And it's changing the air of the house. And I wish I knew the word. It's got to be a German word for Swiss German word for that practice of, even if it's just for a couple of minutes, open all the windows. And it's just sort of key to health, that you don't let the air around you be stale air. And I love that metaphor for taking care of ourselves. And I think when you're feeling heavy and dark and lethargic and lost, consider that you have just simply forgotten to open all the windows. You've let the air around you go stale. And the way to open those windows is to tap into what you used to love, because there's a very, very good chance that translates into something that you can do right now, something that you've forgotten that you are. If you loved being in the garden when you were a kid, pulling weeds with your dad, then you need to get back in the dirt. That's very important to go and do that. If you loved plunking around on your mother's instruments, then you need to start playing music again. And I don't care how bad you think you are at it, you need to just start doing that again, have a musical practice. Yeah, so I just really feel like we need to remember those elemental things that we used to love to do, and that's how we change our air.
Mm. Oh yeah, I feel this so strongly, and I just want to kind of circle it back to grief and
Mhm.
like I would go, and I'd love your thought on this, but I would go so far as to say like I've been able to transcend so much of my pain, which will always be part of me. Like I'm not immune to pain and suffering,
Mm.
as I still have many years to live. My creative practice, whatever it looks like on any given day, and I'm not just talking about, painting, writing. Almost now I'm thinking about the physical and breathing, being outside nature, whatever. But it's really helped me, yeah, just transcend the heaviness you were just talking about. Yeah. And I don't know, has that been for you? And I'm not sure if it's that for like everyone.
The thing that just got me thinking about is talking to my kids about math. Um, Math in particular is, for most people, with the exception of people who really are sort of numerical savants, um, it's not easy. It's a struggle. And the reason why, unlike so many other subjects, is because if we don't stay on top of math, math is going to get on top of you. And it happens really fast. So you just have to make sure that you don't start slipping in your understanding, because math is a subject that is taught kind of in layers that build upon each other. And so if you're getting weak on a layer and then another layer is piled on top, you're going to be absolutely underwater and really, really mixed up very quickly. So you need to, even if you think you're good, you need to stay on top of those practice sheets so that it doesn't get on top of you. And this just made me think of that when you asked this question, because I think once we find our balance, once we reconnect to the stuff that we're pretty sure feeds us, that these channels, these pathways to help us cope with life, with disappointment, with stress, whether it's physical, creative, a little bit of both. Once we've defined for ourselves what that looks like, you're in a much better position when bad things happen to you,
Mm.
because you already have that language and that practice, so that disappointment, fear, catastrophe doesn't drown you, doesn't immediately get on top of you, because you already have inroads to bolstering yourself and coping and finding a shape to how you're going to show up when you have no control, because you already have those avenues for yourself. And so I think, and maybe that's why when we get older we get wiser. Maybe it's not so much wisdom in terms of intellect, but maybe it's wisdom because as we age, we accumulate not only more disappointment and more pain, more suffering, which is what happens, but we also accumulate more expertise of the self. We accumulate more interests. We accumulate more hobbies, more stuff that helps us find our feet.
Mhm.
And that, maybe that is wisdom, is the ability to self-generate our own sense of purpose and direction and calm and venting. When you're older, you have more of those. When you're younger, you have fewer. So when you're younger, you might resort to drinking too much because you just have no other sort of accessible avenues to help balance you. Or you might start eating in an unhealthy, habitual way, or any number of other sort of self-medicating things to try to cope, because you don't have enough modes of expression, modes of escape, modes of coping when the control is not there.
Yeah, and that's why too I ask you, like I feel the preventative aspect of it, like almost, and I don't want to say like to do it before tragedy hits, but almost like it really does help. Like I remember thinking like, oh my God, like I think I would want to kill myself if I didn't have my yoga mat, if I didn't have my paintings. And I don't mean to be like dramatic, but that was really that. It was really, really that. I was like, I get it why you'd want to kill yourself if you didn't have that, like, and to keep coming back, I think, to what you love. I know in a way, like, I kind of find what I lost in what I love. Like it's almost I get to commune with that, which feels whole. But that's my experience. I don't know.
I mean, if you hadn't have had yoga, if you hadn't have had art, well, first of all, you would have been a different person. So
Yeah.
it's really hard to speak in that kind of hypothetical. But I think people who don't have either of those things sorted, the physical, the creative, I think it's not necessarily that. I guess what I'm saying is I think as much as the despair would bring you to dark places, I think most of us find our way.
Mm.
It's just if you don't have those channels already, it's hard. It's harder because you're not certain in who you are. You're not certain in what your body needs. You're not able to recognize symptoms before they overwhelm you in terms of, I need some fresh air. I need to move. I need to create something. I need to grow something, and that will make me feel better. You just don't know. You don't have the ability to read your own signals.
Mm.
And so that makes it harder, certainly. But I think if we can engage this ridiculous hypothetical of Estelle not having art or yoga, you would still have the child who came first. And at the very least, all of us have something in our lives that needs our care.
Mm.
And, I remember watching Ricky Gervais had a beautiful series called Afterlife that is, I think it's 2 seasons. I much prefer the first season. I feel like it almost should have stopped there. But it's about a man whose wife dies of cancer and they didn't have any kids. And it's basically about him being at the point where I don't know if he was necessarily suicidal, but he certainly was at a breaking point where I think the whole premise of the show is that he just doesn't care about life anymore. And so he actually becomes kind of an asshole because he starts transmitting that to other people.
Mm.
And I do remember now. He is suicidal as well. But the one thing that keeps him from really sinking deep into an unrecoverable place is that he loves his dog. He
Mm.
has this dog that has to be walked every day. He has this dog that if he kills himself, the dog isn't going to get fed for
Mm.
who knows how long. And so I really think there's always something that is going to pull us back from that brink. There's
Mm.
always some form of, you gotta get up, because if you don't get up and do that thing, your dog needs your love, your garden needs your love, your mother and your father need your love. There's always things that need you to tend to them.
Mhm.
And so I think maybe I'm an optimist, that I think about people who would call themselves not creative, people who would call themselves not physical at all, can't stand exercise. Maybe they live a long way away from the woods. I can totally relate to those feelings. We've got to think about that right now. There could be someone listening to this who lives in a high-rise apartment in downtown Toronto who would say, I don't have a creative bone in my body.
Mhm.
What about them? How do they find those outlets? And the thing is they will.
Mhm.
But like all of us, I mean, no matter what our context is, we just have to not give up searching,
Hmm.
because there is always life that needs to be tended to. And sometimes when you're at your lowest, that is what saves you. It's not the sort of grandiose inspiration. It's not the beautiful practice or the athletic ability. It's the small things that if you don't do them, they won't get done. And there's a certain mind, a certain type of person that they're sort of compulsive enough about the things that they do that that's what keeps them afloat. And we all have those things, that sense of responsibility and that sense of, yes, I'm suicidal, but I don't want to be that dickhead that actually goes through with it, for God's sake.
Hmm.
I'm just not willing to to let that happen, and that's their starting point to start climbing up and out. I hope that I'm not saying anything insensitive when I say that. I'm kind of shooting from the hip here, because I've known people that would call themselves suicidal, and I have mixed emotions about that, because too often suicide becomes a weapon, becomes something that is abusive to people around you as well as to yourself.
Mhm.
And that makes me very, very, I have a sort of a very low tolerance for it. Um, and that's where the Scotch Protestant grandmother in me kind of kicks in again, to say, now smarten up and start realizing what this way of thinking, how manipulative it is to everyone around you, and you're manipulating yourself, and you have just gotten buried in self-absorption, and you need to, like, you're at an emergency point now in terms of buying that journal, cracking it to the first page, and remembering who you are, remembering who you were when you were untroubled and when you were brand new, and tapping into again who that person is inside you. And you're just at that emergency point. So I hope I didn't, I'm feeling like I'm speaking harshly. So I hope it doesn't come across that way, because it is, harshness can be loving and love can be harsh, but these are things that are really, really important.
As I'm listening to you, it's your words are full of compassion, and I feel our conversation really sums it up when you said we were who we are,
Yeah.
and it's it's kind of really, about that. There's so much golden nuggets in what we've just talked about. This is so rich. I wish, Kate, I could like take you with me every week. And I love this is meant like our conversation. And I said this at part one, it was really meant to be stream of consciousness, and stream of consciousness is no script, right? So whatever
Yeah.
it goes, and we're here not to judge it and to just welcome it.
Mm.
So I want to thank you. And I guess the last question I want to ask you, Kate, as we're about to just wrap up our 3-part conversation, your book and your story, A Field Guide to Grief, if it were to have like a shape, do you know, would it have a certain shape? Like, would it be the shape of, I don't know, a spiral or a cycle or a circle? Or like, for example, I think of my documentary and my writing, like it's really the shape of a butterfly, like, and it's kind of like the transformation of it.
A tin can telephone, you know? It doesn't, the only shape it has is of me speaking into a tin can and a string, and hoping that someone who needs me will pick up the other end, and then it becomes a straight line. That's it. It becomes a straight line between two people, between someone who's on another side, if there is such a thing as a before and after. And I, early on in my loss, I would have said, screw you. There is no before or after. This is me now. But now that I have had, almost 14 years, there is a before and after, because all of the edges of that pain eventually soften and integrate. And the shape of my work in this sense is just that straight line that is searching for another person who needs to hear that. And so it's just a straight line. It's just a way of saying, the reason why you need to understand that what's happening to you right now, the way you feel right now, that isn't you. It's just this thing that happened to you has just momentarily gotten on top of you. That's all. It's not you. It's just that thing has buried you for the time being. But that doesn't define you. That doesn't set the rest of your life at all. You just need to understand and try to separate the feelings from the definition of who you are, because you are so much more than just those feelings that you're having on this particular day, in this particular context, in this particular loss. It's just gotten on top of you. And I think, that's what I hope, is that the shape of Notes for the Everlost is just that straight line that I hope will resonate not just to people who have held a child, an infant, as he died, like I did, and like you did, but that resonates to people recently robbed of their mother or their wife or a brother. That there will be something in the springboard of what happened to me that feels like a lifeline for you. And maybe that's overstating it. Maybe what I mean by lifeline is just you feel a little tug on the end of that rope when you're feeling lost and buried and overwhelmed that says, yeah, I was too. And on some days I still am. But it's not every day. And it's not me. That's not the whole of me. And when you feel that little tug on that straight line, on that piece of string, you know that there are other people out here who are very, very familiar with those feelings and who share them with you. And sometimes that's enough to just make you go, okay, all right. So here I am feeling these feelings, and I don't know what to do to think my way through them. So I think what I need to do today is just open all the windows. And if I can just get you to just open some of those windows and just keep trying and try again tomorrow, then that's a straight line that I feel really good to have created.
Well, I'm holding a tin can right now, and I'm listening.
Mumble, mumble, murfle.
Kate, you're welcome here on the show whenever you want. You're like a VIP guest.
It was such a delight. And I'm so keen to kind of, I hope this is interesting for the people listening. I hope it hasn't been too much of anything. I hope it's been useful, and I'm sort of keen to continue a conversation on anything at all. I will talk with you from my closet anytime. Such a delight.
Yeah, such a delight. And I, in my point of view, like nothing is ever too much. And if we feel it's too much, is that they have that much more place in
That's right.
to be heard. So please do get Kate's book, and we can find you on Instagram. Yes.
Well, yeah, probably the easiest thing to do is just go to kateinglis.com, and all of my social links are there. So Instagram and Twitter, which I have different feelings about, and Facebook, which I also have different feelings about, but nevertheless, I'm there.
Hey, I can't wait to connect with you more, and I love you so much.
I love you too, Estelle.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye.
This podcast was produced by Tosh Taylor of the Podcast Hub Productions. Find her online at podcasthub.ca.